Have you heard the term retirement readiness? Well, here to talk with me about that term and what it means is Dana Anspach from Sensible Money. Dana, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Great to be here.
Great to have you here because I'm eager to learn what you think of the term retirement readiness and what is it exactly?
It's a great question. And I love the term retirement readiness, but I have to admit it probably means different things to different people. What some people think of is, am I financially ready to retire? Can I retire? What kind of lifestyle can I afford? And of course, as a financial planner, when I think of retirement readiness, that's what goes through my head. It's all of the math and all of the number crunching that would allow me to tell someone, yes, you can afford to retire, and here's the lifestyle that you can realistically have for as long as you're here with us. But there's also the psychological side of retirement. Am I emotionally ready? There's value that comes from work, there's social interaction, there's the sense of contribution. And I have found that many people, once you tell them that financially they could retire, they will continue to work. It releases the burden. They feel like this weight is off their shoulder. And so they say, you know what, I'm going to keep going until I get a manager I don't like, or until I really feel like I'm ready. And that's the psychological side. So I think you have to keep both of those sides in perspective when you think about what is retirement readiness.
Yeah. So when I think about assessing one's retirement readiness from a financial perspective, oftentimes we focus on the size of your nest egg, but there are some other ways to think about retirement readiness as well.
There are, and I actually think the size of your nest egg can be quite misleading when it comes to whether you're financially ready to retire. But while we're saving money, that's what we're focused on. And it's really the only measuring stick we have is on paper, how much do I have? And of course, we want to earn the highest rate of return and we want to see that number grow as large as possible. And around that number have come about various rules of thumb, I guess we'll call them. I don't necessarily like the term rules, but you hear about the 4% rule, which gives you a rough estimate of how much you could withdraw. So the 4% rule says realistically, you could withdraw about 4% of your financial assets each year and have that increase with inflation over an estimated 30-year life expectancy. So on $1 million, you could withdraw about $40,000 a year. But unfortunately, we don't actually spend that way. And some of us retire at 55 and some at 60 and some at 65. And sometimes Social Security doesn't start till 70, or a pension will start at a different age, or your spouses are different ages. So you don't need the exact same amount of money each year. And so the 4% rule becomes difficult to use in those situations. And then of course you have a situation where you could just project your assets, just like we do when you're accumulating, right? We assume a rate of return, we assume how much you're going to contribute. I call that a linear projection. And basically you're projecting to the end of life and saying, do I still have any money left if I withdraw this amount? And that is one of the retirement readiness tests that I do like if you use realistic assumptions. There's also something called a Monte Carlo. And with a Monte Carlo, you're simulating all types of future possibilities. So we know that, for example, if you could earn an average rate of return of 5%, well, an average by nature means half the time you're probably going to earn something less than 5 and half the time more than 5. And so a Monte Carlo simulates your financial accounts over this random pattern of returns and gives you a probability of success. I also think that can be quite misleading if you don't know how to interpret the numbers, and sometimes that can cause people to think that their situation is worse than it actually is. And then of course you have something called a historical audit, or an aft cast, I've heard it called, by Jim Otar, who is another retirement expert, where you're taking your portfolio and your planned withdrawals and you're going back and you're testing it over the past. So it's as if you were retiring and it's 1927 and you're about to embark on the Great Depression, but you don't know it yet. And you're simply testing your plan. Would it have worked? You're testing your plan as if you had retired in the 60s, where we had a prolonged period of time with below average market returns. So that type of historical audit or historical testing is yet another way to test. So there's many ways to test your financial plan. And unfortunately, simply using one of them, none of them are perfect, right? They all have their pros and their cons.
So at Sensible Money, you tend to do it a little bit differently then.
We do it a little differently because each test has its pros and its cons. We actually have chosen a three-pronged retirement readiness test. And all of our retirement readiness tests run on a projection of someone's actual cash flow. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you have a mortgage that's going to be paid off 10 years into retirement. Your expense will change. Suppose you're retiring at 60 and you have to pay for healthcare out of pocket, but at 65, Medicare begins. Your actual health insurance costs will drop, and pretty substantially, when you enroll in Medicare. So that expense will change. Auto purchases, we ask people what price points they purchase at and how often, so that we can build those future purchases into their plan. Home repairs, if you live in a brand new home, your upkeep expenses are probably going to be less than some people live in a home that hasn't had any work done for many, many years. And so if it's going to need a new roof or other major expenses, we want to model those in. So we start by using a cash flow projection model that also incorporates all your various income streams and when those might start. So we can be much more accurate about what you would need to withdraw from your savings and investments each year and how that number will change. So I think that's key, is regardless of the financial modeling technique you're using, is, are you just using a broad set of assumptions, or are you actually modeling out what your spending patterns and income patterns are likely to be? So we like to actually model all of that out. Then we apply 3 different retirement readiness tests. The first one is what we think of as very big picture. It's the Monte Carlo analysis. In general, using this cash flow projection for you, what's your probability of success? And that's based on a set of assumptions about the rate of return that you would earn, the inflation rate. Typically, we're using 3% inflation on living expenses and 5% annual increases on healthcare related expenses. And for example, if there's a mortgage, well, that's fixed costs. There's no inflation applied to that item. So even those assumptions are customized and individualized based on each person's situation. So that Monte Carlo result is very big picture. In general, could you retire at this age and maintain your lifestyle? And the way we do the testing, we need to see an 80% success rate or greater. Then we move on to something that's called a fundedness test. It works much like how a pension plan tests their whole plan. So a pension plan has to deliver retirement paychecks to lots of people. And what they do is look at the value in the plan today and the obligations they have to pay out in the future. And they assume what's called a discount rate, or think of it as an assumed rate of return that the assets are likely to earn. And do they have enough? I mean, that's what a fundedness test is do I have enough in the plan today, assuming it might earn this rate of return, to pay out these obligations into the future? Well, that can be done at an individual level by taking that cash flow projection and saying, well, here's what we'll need to withdraw from savings and investments each year for you to maintain your lifestyle. Let's take the present value of that number using a pretty conservative discount rate, 3% or 4%. So we're translating that cash flow stream into what would you have to have in the bank today to deliver that. And that's what's called a fundedness test. And then we compare that to what you have. You either have enough or you don't. And so we want to see that fundedness ratio, as we call it, at 110% or higher using a 4% discount rate. And then we move on to our third retirement readiness test, which is an actual historical audit. So once we've dialed in all of the factors of someone's plan, such as how they're going to withdraw and when they're going to claim Social Security, some of those factors can actually improve the results of some of these tests. So after we've dialed those in, we take the final version of the projection and we run it through real life history. So we want to retire this person in 1927 and see what would have happened over 30 years, and in 1928, and then project what would have happened, and in 1930, and then project what would have happened. And again, that gives us this, I actually call it the spaghetti chart, the simulation of all these patterns that their accounts would have followed. And so we want to see 100% success rate in all scenarios since the Great Depression. And so when we apply those 3 tests and then we update these tests every single year for each person, it gives us a directional sense. Are the results of these 3 tests staying about the same each year? Are they improving? Are they getting worse? And it allows us to more accurately make changes, whether we should give this person an inflation raise, whether we should recommend that they cut back on spending a little bit. But prior to actually pulling the trigger on retirement, it actually gives us the confidence to say, yes, we feel 100% confident that your plan will work, this retirement date works, and this level of spending works. And it's that peace of mind that all of these calculations help us bring to our clients.
Right. So I know you have some other metrics that you use, but just a question about these 3 tests. You said that all 3 have to be at either 80% for Monte Carlo, 110 for the fundedness, and 100% for the aft casting. If those numbers aren't in line, obviously adjustments need to be made either on the spending side or retirement date or something. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And sometimes it's adjustments that most of us have heard of. Could you work an extra year or 2? Would you be able to downsize? And so you're spending a little bit less in retirement. Would you be able to save more, which is still lifestyle expenses that you're giving up so that you can save a little more along the way. So there's also, however, in some cases, what I've called the spend more now plan. And these are in cases where someone says, no, I have to retire. And so we talk about the impact of inflation, which is in the news a lot right now. And so we'll explain to someone it's possible that we could get you more guaranteed income today by playing around with how you claim Social Security and whether you use guaranteed income annuities. But that income may not go up as fast as the rate of inflation. So essentially, it's the spend more now plan. You're having a little more lifestyle today, but you are going to have to make some adjustments later. And for some people, that is an acceptable trade-off if they are absolutely insistent that they are not going to work any longer. We just explain the trade-offs. Ultimately, it's not my value system, it's each individual's value system and what's important to them. And if they really understand the trade-offs, they can then make a very educated decision about what they want to do. Do they want to retire now or work a little longer? What types of adjustments do they want to make?
So what are some other metrics that you contemplate when you're looking at someone's plan?
Well, one of them is liquidation value at end of plan. And that sounds like kind of a scary term. Sometimes I hear it called terminal value. And we used to call it that, but we didn't like that term. And it really is measuring, if I have $1 million when I pass, let's say at 90 years old, and it's all in an IRA or 401k, my heirs are going to pay income tax on all of that. But if I have $1 million in a Roth IRA, that's all after tax money. And so when we look at liquidation value, projected liquidation value at the end of plan, it's translating everything into an estimate of after-tax dollars. And it allows us to measure the impact of things like Roth conversions or how we draw down the account. So if leaving assets to heirs is important, then we need to measure what we're leaving on an after-tax basis. So that's one way to look at it. Another way is survivor cash flow. So cash flow today isn't the only factor. You could make a decision to claim your pension plan for life only and get the maximum dollar amount. But if something happens to you early on in retirement, that might leave no guaranteed income for your spouse. So measuring things simply in terms of maximizing cash flow doesn't always work. We also, in the cases of couples, have to look at, well, what is the situation? What is the amount of survivor income that someone would have? And then one of my favorites is another measurement technique we use, which is called a coverage ratio. And what I mean by that is we look usually into someone's early 70s and at their projected expenses, and we want to see how much of those expenses are covered by guaranteed income sources, things like Social Security, pensions, annuity income. And that brings more security to the plan. If they should make bad investment decisions or cognitive decline cause them to make just poor decisions about how they're spending their money, we know this baseline of guaranteed income would be there no matter what. And I recently saw another article on this topic by Michael Finke and David Blanchett, I believe it was, in Think Advisor. And it was titled, Why Annuities Work Like a License to Spend in Retirement. And they discussed in this article that people with guaranteed income tend to spend more than people that might have the equivalent amount in savings and investments. So they essentially have the same worth. Two households could have the same worth, but one's worth has been turned into a guaranteed income stream, and that allows them to feel more comfortable spending a little bit more throughout retirement. And that is essentially what we're measuring with our coverage ratio. So those are some different ways you can measure success rather than simply looking at the gross amount of net worth or financial assets. And I think all of these ways add value to a retiree as they're trying to plan ahead.
Yeah. So a question on coverage ratio. I'm sure it depends on facts and circumstances, but is there a percent that you like to see, 50, 70, 80% for coverage ratio?
There is actually. So we want to see 50% or higher at age 70 or 72. And why do we pick 70 or 72? Well, there are many, many moving parts between the age of 55 and now 72. You have Social Security claiming and pensions and Medicare. Required minimum distributions now start at 72. And many people are delaying Social Security to age 70 to maximize that guaranteed income source. So after all of that has settled, that's when we can get a pretty good snapshot of your guaranteed income. And also cognitive decline sets in later in life, often late 70s, 80s, hopefully not ever, but we can begin to see some changes in someone's late 70s and 80s. And so that's when having that guaranteed income becomes the most important, is during those times where you could be at greater risk just due to your behavior.
So you have all these instruments, all these tests. What are some of the more common questions that you can answer with these tests?
Oh, that's my favorite part. So once the model is in place, it becomes very easy to see if certain decisions improve the outcome. So if someone is going to convert IRA assets to a Roth IRA, or if we're going to draw out of the IRA first and delay Social Security, does that actually improve their outcome? Did it improve how much money after tax they have remaining at the end of plan? Did it improve the amount of guaranteed income they have during their lifetime? Did it improve the amount of guaranteed income that might be available to a survivor? Did their fundedness ratio go up? Did their AFTCAST or historical audit improve? So all of these things become engineering-like ways to measure whether a decision actually improved the outcome. So instead of guessing now, we have a mathematical way to run the numbers and say, yes, this actually did improve your income or did not. And then, of course, there's always the middle ground. I often tell people decisions can be red, yellow, or green. Red, this did not improve your outcome, don't do it. Green, this is a no-brainer. This decision has a measurable, meaningful difference for you. And a lot of the decisions fall in the yellow area where it's about the same. And then we can have discussions around values and really what is most important to someone.
So it strikes me that if for someone who's thinking about whether they're ready to retire, it's much more involved than they may think. And the degree to which they need to have a more fuller understanding of their readiness is critical.
It is. And, when you say it's more involved than they think, I would say, well, it depends on how sure you want to be. So you could use a very simple method like the 4% rule, or you could just decide I'm not going to withdraw from my IRA until I'm 72 and I'll only take out the minimum amount. And certainly you're not going to run out of money, or it's very unlikely you're going to run out of money using those methods. But there may be things that you could easily afford to do that you are foregoing. And I don't mean spending just to be frivolous, but things like having help cleaning the house as you get older, or help with yard work, or things you might want to do with your family, such as getting everyone together for the holidays or for trips. And it might be that those things are affordable and sustainable. And so if you really want to be sure and want to see if you can do those things, that's where this mathematical, more engineering-like approach to testing can give you that kind of certainty and make you feel very confident that, yes, I can do this and I am not jeopardizing my future income or lifestyle.
Yeah. So it strikes me that this sort of peace of mind would be helpful. You mentioned using cash flow analysis, using spreadsheets. Many people are perhaps accustomed to thinking that there's a software program behind that, but not all those programs can do what you've just described.
No, they can't. I do really like the software package at newretirement.com. So they do have a package where you can input all of your data and get somewhat of a linear projection and a Monte Carlo analysis. It doesn't do all of the different types of engineering-like tests that I just discussed. But for someone that just wants to do it themselves and give a basic start, basically see where they're at, I think it can be a great way to approach it. And of course, there's wonderful advisors out there like us and many others that can get you into all of the details and bring that additional peace of mind.
All right. So we covered a lot of ground. Anything that we haven't touched upon that you'd want to make mention of?
I would say that there's a lot of research that shows that people who start planning at least 5 years out from retirement are the happiest. They have the most successful transitions into retirement. So if there's anything I could say, I would tell people, if you are thinking you want to retire in the next 5 years, you really want to start that planning process now. It'll alleviate your stress. It'll make the whole thing a lot easier.